Listen, man. Listen, man. Listen, man. Listen. We talking practice.
Hey, it's Matthew Harvey here at the 12 o'clock siren at the Cowboy Corner on the southeast side of Leonard, Texas Square. On my left at the 6 o'clock is James Hartley.
Too much math for us, yes. And sweating for the last day of the year, I'm back and happy to have Jason sitting to my left.
Hey.
Good afternoon, fellas.
What's up, bub? How you guys doing?
Oh, good. Happy about this cold front pushing through.
Yeah. Coming in. It's the last day of the 90s?
I think so.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thunderstorms tonight and then some cooler weather.
Yeah.
So
I'm excited. This
looking
is
forward to that.
episode 9?
9.
This is episode 9.
Yeah.
Wow, look at us.
I'm pretty stoked for this. I did a lot of research on this interview here, trying to get this gentleman in here. We have a gentleman who was a writer for the Sherman Herald Democrat. He's an attorney. He wrote for the North Texas E-News and is a writer for the Texoma Living magazine. Mr. Edward Southerland.
How you doing, Mr. Southerland?
Doing pretty good.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for being in.
Most people think of Edward Sutherland as my father.
You still look around for him when people call you that?
Yes. And around here when I was growing up, I was always known as Mike.
Ah,
Okay.
Mike.
So anything you want, I'll respond to.
Gotcha.
Is Mike a middle name? Michael?
Yes.
Okay. That makes sense.
So I know I was reading an article where you used to kind of summer down here at the lumber yard and everything. Can you what time frame was that?
Mostly
year?
in the 50s.
In the 50s. All right.
So you were out of Bonham. You lived in Bonham.
I grew up in Bonham. My parents are both from Fannin County. My mother was Mary Jean LaRoe from Leonard.
Okay.
My father was Edward Sutherland from Trenton. I grew up in Bonham.
Gotcha.
I was born in Tennessee because my father was in the Army at the time, World War II. And after the war, he and my parents, and both of them, obviously, came back to Texas. And he had worked for a law firm in Tulsa, Oklahoma before the war, and he went back up there. But there wasn't any place to live. The veterans housing, all these vets coming home from the war, made it real hard to find.
If I may pause you, where in Tennessee?
In Oak Ridge.
Oh, the nuclear program then.
Well, that's an interesting tale on the backside of this. He was, like I said, a lawyer, went to Baylor,
Okay.
was practicing law in Tulsa, and was drafted in 1941. And in those days, if you hit the draft in those 2 years, they had a peacetime draft, you were only in the Army for a year. He met my mother in 1939, and he met her in Leonard at his cousin's drugstore, which was down on the square. My guess is they were planning to get married, and then he got drafted.
Do you remember the drugstore's name or who?
Yeah, it was Conley Drug.
Conley
it was over
Drug.
on the west side of the square.
Okay.
It's in the building where the Leonard Historical
Oh,
Museum is now.
And your cousin's name was?
Biff.
Biff. All
And
right.
he had a brother who had a drugstore in Trenton. His name was Holmes Conley.
Okay.
Okay. So they were planning on getting married, or that's what you thought?
That's my guess. And then he got drafted, and so they figured you're only going to be in for a year. We'll wait. And then World War II came along. He was in the stands in Washington. He was drafted, and he, as I said, went into the counterintelligence service.
Interesting time for that.
And was at Washington's Redskins football game when the announcement came for all military personnel to report to their units immediately. And my guess is that they just decided, let's go ahead and get married. So they got married on Easter Sunday in 1942 here in Leonard at the First Methodist Church.
Cool.
And off they went. I don't know that they had a honeymoon. They went off to Washington, where he was stationed at the time. He was one of the first 4 security people assigned to the Manhattan District. which became the Manhattan
We
Project.
know what
Yes.
that is.
And they lived in Washington for a while. They lived in New York for a while. He then went to officer training, OCS, in Fort Benning, Georgia,
Yes, sir.
and came out a second lieutenant and was still with the Manhattan District. And while they were in Washington, he just disappeared. And he got hold of my mother a few days later and told her he was going somewhere. He couldn't tell her where, and he couldn't tell her how long he'd be gone. And she packed up and came back to Leonard.
Sure. Might as well at that point.
Yeah, might as well. And about 6 months later, he got in touch with her, and he was in Oak Ridge. And my guess is that's where he had been the whole time.
Sure.
So she went up and joined him in Oak Ridge.
Right. So they were just probably getting everything squared away and battened down, and then she
Yes.
was able to go join him.
To go join him. And that's where I was born.
Oh wow.
In January of 45.
Wow.
That's that whole. I've got a buddy from around that area, and that's the lore and the mythology behind the Oak Ridge and the Manhattan Project and everything's really interesting to dive into, and how it all came about. You know?
Oh, it really is. And there's just stories of the side of what was going on. He used to tell stories which my brothers and I love to hear, which were usually funny. I don't imagine he was as serious as he would have been in real life.
Sure.
But he said when they lived in New York, I think my mother was in New York with him for a while. He and his partner had a little office. They were plainclothes people.
Sure.
And every morning they would get up and get the communist newspaper and read it, see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And at night, they would stop by and pick up some money, $50-$60 from the cashier, and go night clubbing. And which would really meant they were going listening.
Absolutely.
Is anybody talking about things? My mother thought this pretty exciting. She wanted to go. So one night they took her, and she got some kind of weird drink with an umbrella, and it passed out. And they took her home and wouldn't let her go anymore.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anyway, my brothers were born in Tulsa. I have twin brothers,
Oh wow.
and I'm about 3 years older than they are. And shortly after they were born, we moved back to Texas, which is what my father had always wanted to do.
How old were you at this point?
I was not quite 3. I
Oh,
had my
okay.
3rd birthday in Bonham.
Bonham.
And he went to work for a firm in Bonham, Judge, a lawyer named Buster Cole, who was about his age, and Judge Cunningham, who had been in Bonham for years.
I think we recognize the name from the prison up
Yeah,
there.
the prison
Yeah,
Buster Cole
correct.
unit out there.
Yeah, and it's called Cunningham, Cole, and Southerland.
Wow.
And that's where he was the rest of his life. And so we lived in Bonham, and I got out of high school, went to a couple of different places. I was kind of a wanderer,
Sure.
and went to University of Texas. And eventually, and this is a long story, it's not really about this, is what we're talking about. I ended up in Atlanta, Georgia. And I lived in Atlanta for 30 years.
Oh wow.
And I drove trucks, and I worked in a book warehouse, and I did some television stuff, and I made a documentary for the Park Service, and it went to night law school. And when I finished that, I passed the bar. And so for the rest of the time I was there, I practiced law and did a variety of other things.
Sure.
And
This isn't going to charge us $200 an hour, is
Yeah.
it?
no, I wasn't making $200. I'd
hadn't-
still been
It hadn't
there.
crossed my mind
Yeah.
until just
No.
now.
This isn't billable hours, is it?
The first case I ever had was a public defender type of thing, misdemeanor with some guy who had a tattoo of a grasshopper on his forehead and didn't know what country he was in.
Wow.
That's another story.
Wow.
That's an interesting choice of tattoos.
That sounds like
Well-
it should be in Florida.
Yeah.
All of that was interesting stuff.
Huh.
Anyway, in 2000, I moved back to Texas. I'd had enough of the big city after 30 years.
Yeah.
And came back here. My brothers both live in Sherman, where they taught school for a long time. And so I ended up in Sherman. And was looking for something to do. My brother knew the editor at the Sherman Herald Democrat. And I'd written things for him and stuff like that. Nothing journalistic since I was in high school. I wrote for the Bonham high school paper.
Cool.
And he said, why don't you go down and see him? So I went down and see Don Eldridge, and he had an opening. And I said, I'll take it. And he tried to talk me out of it because the pay was so bad. But I said, I got to have something to do. So in September of 2000, I started working at the Herald Democrat and was there for 9 years.
Cool.
So let me go back. While you were in Atlanta, you were you did a documentary for the Park Service, huh?
Yeah, it was on the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain and Sherman's Atlanta campaign.
Oh,
They
wow.
used it for something like 30 years.
Wow.
Really?
There's a different one now.
Huh.
But for 30 years, that's what they showed in the visitor center.
Sure. Wonder if we can
And-
still get a hold of that somehow.
Welcome to Atlanta campaign. Is that what you said?
No, not exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it was.
Sherman's Atlanta.
It was more like,
campaign.
hey, I'm
Yeah,
coming
they
through
weren't
Atlanta.
welcoming me at all. He was anything but welcome.
Yeah.
Uh,
That was during his march to the
I've
sea,
got
right?
a copy of it,
Okay.
and it was good. It was nominated for a Telly Award,
Wow.
finalist in the Telly Awards, and I think I've never researched this, but I think it was one of the first documentaries to use graphics,
Okay.
computer graphics, to illustrate some of the battles. They were extremely expensive back then.
Sure.
These were things that you can do today on your home computer for nothing almost. But in those days, they were a whole lot of money.
Right.
And so we could only have a short number of them.
Sure.
But it's a pretty good
How
documentary.
how long did it take you start to finish to get it? Like, okay, you've
About
accepted.
a year.
Oh wow.
What was your role?
Just
I was the writer, one of the producers,
Cool.
one of the people when we go shoot stuff saying, no, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
I mean, it was your project.
Continuity
Not
editor.
totally. There was a friend of mine who was the one who got it.
Right.
And we went in league with a video company in Atlanta who had a lot of experience. I can't remember what they were called. And they were the ones who did the shooting and the editing.
When it was over, were you glad it was over, or do you look back and go, that was a good experience?
Well, no, I enjoyed it. It was a good experience. I wanted to do more. I really liked doing that. But we just never could find anybody with any money.
Yeah.
we
That's
tried
always
to-
the problem.
We tried to pitch and spent 6 months pitching an idea to Charbroil down in Columbus, Georgia, the barbecue grill people,
Okay.
and wrote 2 or 3 scripts and different ideas, and they just wouldn't ever pull the trigger.
We've talked around here, Jason and I and Matthew, about the Lee Peacock feud. And
Oh, yeah.
it'd be. I mean, they've got the Murder at the Corners and that, but it would be interesting to see that on the.
You have
on the
any
screen.
insight on that Lee Peacock feud?
Well, I wrote a number of columns about that. And I do think it would be interesting. And there's been rumors around that somebody was thinking about writing another book.
No, yeah.
There's a group, I'll have to tell you when this is over, but there's a group of people who've done an enormous amount of research into this that I'm on their mailing list.
Really?
Cool.
And around here locally, there's a real estate guy in Bonham named Ronnie Atnip, who I went to high school with,
Okay.
who knows as much about it as anybody.
I think
okay.
that's who wrote the article I shared with you. a while
He's
back.
very, very knowledgeable. He's just a amateur historian, but he's put a lot of work in it. And again, when I was writing those columns, I talked to people around here. I went out with Tom McHolmes, we mentioned him earlier, seeing if there's anything left of Wildcat Thicket, which there's not really. And I looked up, went to the Peacock Graveyard,
Right.
where he's buried, which is over just inside Hunt County.
Uh huh.
You should go to that one.
And,
Yeah.
it's one of those things that nobody's ever going to get the whole truth on.
Sure.
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 And even today, there are people who won't talk about it.
Yeah. Well,
They
Those-
did a little program a few years ago, and for the picnic or for something, this 7th grade put on a play about it in Leonard.
No, wow.
And man, we always created a civil war again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Those
it's just,
that resentment runs deep and long.
oh boy, and it still does.
Mhm.
And the people who knew about it, Tom McHolmes' father was the doctor from Pilot Point, doctor from, I think that's where he was from. One of the central issues in that was the murder of the doctor in Pilot Grove,
Okay.
Yes, sir.
who treated
The
Bob Lee.
sympathizers.
Treated Bob Lee,
treated
yeah.
Bob Lee.
who was shot in the back. Is that correct?
Yeah, and Tom McHome's grandfather moved over here and became a doctor until he's the guy who founded Trenton.
Right.
Cool.
And he said that his grandfather would never talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
about what he knew.
Well, if you think about it, we're not too far removed from it generationally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
No,
So,
in
I
his
mean- I was
case, 3 generations.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I was looking at the dates some of these towns were established, and you're
Yeah.
you're right. It's
For the
Remember-
last couple of years, James and I have done what little research we could online about the subject, and it seems like it's so interesting. I think it would make a great movie.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
a little
Oh, it
mini
would.
series or something.
Yeah.
Like the Hatfield McCoys.
Yeah, TV series or something.
Great. Maybe we can get Kevin Costner for that. You think he'd do that? I don't know.
there's a drop off box outside for
Yeah.
donations.
We'll
That's
get
it.
some money and I'll write you a script.
All right.
Yeah,
that
that sounds
that'll
like-
work.
That sounds like a deal.
Yeah.
There
we
we
need
go.
to,
You heard that here.
Yeah, we'll set up like a Patreon or something and
Yeah.
get people
Oh,
fund
that's-
this Lee
be
Peacock
interesting.
project.
Yeah.
Good
So-
idea.
Yeah. So when you moved, when you did, you moved back to Sherman, and around what time was that?
2000.
2000. You became you became a writer at the Herald Democrat.
For about a year, I was a reporter,
Okay.
and then I became strictly a feature writer and a columnist. I'd written a column almost since the time I got there.
So you moved back in 2000. What was it like to be a newspaperman when 9/11 2001 happened?
Well, in my case, it didn't make much difference
Right.
because I didn't write those kind of stories.
Sure.
I remember being in the newsroom and seeing, we had a TV screen up there, and seeing it happen and seeing a plane crash into the Trade Center and thinking, because this is an airplane crash.
Right.
You know, I don't
It's a
think
horrible
for a-
tragedy. Horrible
yeah,
mistake.
horrible mistake of some kind. Because I don't think for a while we probably didn't really know what had happened. I remember writing a column about it that week, or several probably. Most of the columns I did a Sunday op-ed column every week. That was whatever I wanted to write,
Sure.
and occasionally it was political. I had a lady in Trenton who would always write me and chew me out because she didn't like what I wrote about the Democrats, for whom I had a little use by that time.
Right.
And,
They were not the Democratic Party of your youth, for sure.
They're not. And then the rest of the time, I just wrote what I wanted to. Don Eldridge and I became really good friends. He was the editor. He never said no. He never turned one down. I wrote a lot about history because that's something I like and I'm interested in. I wrote a lot about nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote food columns. I was really fortunate in that the things that I found interesting were things that the average people found interesting.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't write about chemistry
Yeah. Yeah.
or things like that because I didn't know that much about chemistry.
Yeah.
And that's what
Quantum
we're
theory.
That's what we're trying to do here too.
Yeah.
Is we're talking
Yeah.
about this town and this area and
Yeah.
the region
And
in general.
that's what I wrote about
Yeah.
Yeah.
because that's what I remember.
You said
And
nostalgia. That's exactly what got me. Hooked me on the story I first read by you about your grandfather. How long did he own the lumberyard over here? And you're
I
talking on the southwest side of the square where Bear
Well-
Creek is right now.
I can't exactly tell you that. Here's what I know. He was named Les LaRoe.
Okay.
The LaRoes were from Greenville, and they had a whole string of lumber yards. They had 4, 5, or 6 lumber yards in North Texas at one point. He had 2 sisters, and he had, I think, 4 brothers. They were all in little small towns. He met my grandmother, who was born in Alabama, although her mother was from Texas. This is an interesting side story. You got to watch
No.
me. I wander off.
It's all right.
okay?
We like
fine.
it.
That's fine. We're not going to stop you.
My great-grandmother was named Alice Kimbrough. She was from Denton, as I remember. She didn't die until she was in her 90s, and I knew her
Oh, wow.
as a little kid. And She was a teacher, and in the early 1890s, she was teaching school in Tuscumbia, Alabama. I don't know how she ended up there. And she was engaged to marry the local Baptist preacher who was 40-something. Notice she was 19. And on the night before the wedding, she eloped with a man named Percy Armstrong.
Scandalous.
Who was a railroad engineer. Well, it wasn't scandalous because I've got a clipping of a story from the local newspaper. Then 2 or 3 days later, they thought it was fantastic. They didn't like that preacher very much, and they didn't think she should marry him.
Wow.
That's amazing.
So then my grandmother was born a couple of years later, and she was born in 1895 in either Tuscumbia or Stevenson, Alabama, which is not too far away. These are in North Alabama. When she was about 2 years old, maybe 3, her father, Percy, was killed in a train accident up in Tennessee. Train wreck.
Oh, man. It's a bad way to go, sounds like.
Well, according to what I've always heard, his train ran into a blind mule on a bridge and overturned, and he was killed.
I feel like that's something that could happen in Alabama.
Wow.
This was in Tennessee.
Oh, close enough.
And close enough.
On the border, I'm sure.
And shortly thereafter, she and her mother moved back to Texas and back to Denton. And my great-grandmother then, at some point after that, fairly soon, remarried. And interestingly enough, married a man named Kimbrough, so that she went back to her maiden name.
Wow.
And she had 2 more children. My grandmother had a stepdaughter, a stepson, I'll say it, a stepbrother and a stepsister.
Oh, wow.
My grandmother went to school at Texas Women's College. And sometime, I'm guessing 1914, 15, maybe 16, she was teaching school in Bailey. My grandfather's LaRoe Lumber Company had a lumber yard in Bailey.
Oh, wow.
And that's where they met. And he ran the lumber yard. He was he and all of his brothers were great baseball players. Played on the town baseball team.
They had a great baseball team, didn't they?
Town teams everybody played baseball in those days.
Right.
Every town, smallest one, had a baseball team. Anyway, he was drafted again before they got married, and he was drafted when we went in World War I, and spent his military career at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. By his account, he was in the quartermaster corps playing baseball.
All right.
He was the star catcher and first baseman for the quartermaster baseball team. And he always said he tried to go to France, and they wouldn't send him. And when he got out of the Army, they came back, and that's when they got married.
I am almost certain that episode 2, the man that we talked about who was descended from the Texas Giants, Gene Martin, his father or his uncle, who knew Audie Murphy, he went down to Fort Sam Houston and also played baseball in the quartermaster corps.
Well,
I wonder if they knew each other.
I'm gonna have to go.
We're going to re-listen to that.
Yeah.
Well, my grandfather, when I was a little kid, had a cigar box in Leonard at the house with clippings from his baseball playing in the Army. And he was good. He was the star of the team. I don't know what happened to that. I wish I had it. Anyway, they got married, and by that time he was running the lumberyard in Ector. And so they moved to Ector. They lived in Ector. And my mother was born in Ector in 1920. And then sometime between 1920 and 1925, I'm guessing about the middle, they probably closed that yard. But they had one in Leonard, and he came over to manage that one, and that's where they lived the rest of their life. And my uncle, my mother's brother, was born in Leonard in 1925.
Oh, wow.
So what was your experience as a toddler kid, 10-year-old or so, coming here for the summers?
Oh, absolutely. I would spend a lot of time over here, probably when I'm about 6, 7, until I'm about 12, probably, maybe 13.
Sure.
And during the summer, I'd come over here and spend a week at a time with my grandparents. And usually then on Sunday, my parents would come over here for Sunday dinner and take me back to Bonham. they lived in a white house right across the street from the school, the high school, the red brick high school.
Uh-huh.
What is now the elementary?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the late elementary was later built south of that
Right.
building, west of that building.
Yep.
And I just loved coming over here. I'd do that 3 or 4 times in the summertime and spend a week at a time.
Now back. This is the early 50s, I guess.
This is the early to late 50s.
Okay. So, and you mentioned Depot, Katy Depot, to me. Explain that to some of the people that don't remember anything and have no idea about what was going on
Yeah.
with the Katy Depot and the lumber yard.
I'm kind of ignorant of all that.
Yeah, and there's a Katy Depot in Denison.
Well, that's a great big building. There
Right.
was a Katy Depot in every town along here. The Katy had a line
Katy
that ran
Trail.
out. Katy came to Denison. They had a line that ran out of Denison, ran through Trenton, ran through Leonard, ran to Greenville, and then at Greenville it went. They hit the main line that went to Dallas and Fort Worth. Fort Worth was their main place. And the depot here was right down there at the end of whatever that street is. This is Main Street, the street one over. I never
Connet.
knew the street names. of this
Connet, I
town.
believe.
What? I don't know what it was.
Yeah, I
I
don't,
believe Connet runs into
Okay.
I think
right in front of where the lumber yard would have been.
No, not in front of this lumber yard, the one a street
Yeah.
over,
Yeah.
which
yeah,
is where
next
my
one.
grandfather's lumber yard was,
Yep.
the Roll Lumber Company.
Mm-hmm.
They also had a lumber yard in Whitewright in my life that my uncle, his brother, Uncle Ed ran. Excuse me. And the lumberyard over here, the building on the corner, which is now a feed store, was Murphy Chevrolet. And right next to Murphy was a little empty lot, not very wide. I don't know which one of them owned it, either Murphy or my grandfather. He used it to keep sheep in, to eat the grass. And then was the lumberyard, which was, in my mind, pretty impressive. It was 3 buildings. One of them was the first one was had the nails and wallpaper and all that kind of stuff in that building. And then he had a office with the little rooms behind it, heated by a coal-burning pot-bellied stove.
wow.
And then they had where the lumber was stored was a 2-story roofed, whatever you want to call it, storage place with a ladder to go up there that I thought was
A
spectacular.
hayloft, maybe.
It was a fort
Yeah.
because
Oh, I
you could
bet.
climb up there and it had a walk around like the fort. You couldn't see very far.
Yeah.
Had a and then a driveway, that ran all the way around and down the other side.
Cool.
There was a big bridge, that connected the 2 sides of the lumberyard. Now there were room for storing lumber on the other side across from where it was, but it wasn't used much. But there was a bridge that went across, and that scared the hell out of me.
I bet.
It was high and it was covered with dust because they didn't use it.
Yeah.
And for a long time, I wouldn't mess around. Finally, I worked up enough courage to cross the bridge, and I was very proud of myself.
Turn into a man.
And
Yeah.
it was no longer scary.
Right.
And then back behind the lumberyard to the south were 3 big concrete bunkers that held sand and gravel and something else, probably
Sure.
another level of gravel. And that was the world's biggest sandbox for me when
Sure.
I came over there. I'd go over there and play in the sand. And the depot was right just south of that, okay? No longer there. It was what they call a flag stop because passenger trains didn't stop unless they were told to stop.
Right.
But freight trains came through there and switched the cars in and out. Lumber came by.
So it was
Freight
an
car.
active depot then.
Huh?
It was active then.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There was one in Trenton. There was one in
And what are
every
they?
little town. These were all built back when the railroad first started in those area. And they were always built because railroads had to have a place to get water.
Right.
They were steam engines, and they
Right.
could run only so far. That's why the Leonard Pond was out there.
Ah.
It was a railroad pond. It was not when I was around because they weren't. They either had engines that held more water, or the coal
It
car that
refined the
also held water,
technology a little
or they
bit.
had started running diesel.
Yeah, it started.
Yeah.
There was a pond in Trenton. Every one of these
Yeah.
little towns had a little pond right along the railroad and a water tower,
Yeah.
and that's where the train stopped.
So what kind of materials are they dropping off or picking up here?
Well, my grandfather got his lumber that way.
Yeah, that's cool.
They'd set us off a boxcar full of lumber, and he'd hire somebody to go there and
Offload it.
unload it because
Ugh.
that's a hell of a job in the summer.
You ever offloaded a boxcar?
No
Oh.
way. No
I-
way.
I
I had
d-
a friend that did once, and he did it once, and that was
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah, it's a whipping.
It is, and particularly, again, like I said, in the summer. I don't know what else. I'm sure everybody else who got things, there just weren't that many trucks,
Yeah,
or not like the way they are now.
right. So
And-
would locals be waiting to pick up something that might be coming in that day, or is it just
well,
kind
the
of
locals
manufactured?
didn't wait. The locals made a regular. I worked on the railroad.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Summer after I graduated from high school, I got a job on the Texas Pacific out of Bonham, and I worked for the railroad every summer for 3 years.
Cool.
Working on locals. I was a brakeman. In a place like Bonham, there were 4 or 5 a day that would run between Bonham and Sherman and Bonham and Texarkana. And you would haul cars and stop at every place. If you had a car to drop off in Honey Grove or in Paris, you'd get to Paris and we'd switch the Paris yard. Every stop between, in fact, there was one that went west and one that came east every day. And I'm sure it was the same here, and they probably operated between Denison and Greenville,
Yeah.
would be my guess. So there might be 2 or 3 locals a day, plus at one time 2 or 3 passenger trains a day,
Yeah.
or more. I don't
You might
know.
say your career was on track.
Hmm?
You might say your career was on track.
That's true. Oh, it was a fantastic job. I traveled. I made way more money than any kid I knew.
Yeah.
They would hire college guys the way they did. Bonham was on the dispatch point for the T&P.
Cool.
It was in the center of what was grandiosely known as the International, is that right? The Intercontinental Division of the T&P. Right.
Yeah, that
From
is a bit
Texarkana to
grandiose.
Fort
Wow.
Worth through Whitesboro. The Intercontinental Division. But they would hire some kids in the summer. I think I may have been one of the first ones, first summer, and with 2 of my friends, to work the extra board so that the regular crews could take off and go to vacation. And I never knew what train I was going to get. They'd just call you and say, okay, you're going to catch the West Local this week. I wrote a lot about those in the columns too. I'd catch the East Local going to Texarkana and coming back.
Cool.
So it was a wonderful job. It was that's one of the greatest things I ever did.
Yeah.
And the nice thing working out of Bonham, everybody knew me. So it was like having 14 uncles to make
Sure.
sure you didn't do something really stupid.
No. What was this about the Texas Special?
Well, the Texas Special was the varnish. That was the term you used for the most important passenger train on the line. All the big railroads had a varnish.
Right.
The Texas Special was the varnish of the Katy. Actually, it was a joint venture of the Katy and the Frisco. And it had 2 sections that came out of San Antonio and Houston, and then came north through Denison to St. Louis, back and forth every day. And sometimes more than one section. They'd have a train and they'd have another train right behind it because it was full. When you got to St. Louis, you could go on to Chicago and then New York. And you didn't even have to get off the train.
Wow.
They just put your car that you were on onto the back end of another train.
Sure.
That wasn't the Texas Special anymore. It started in 1915. Katy had another high-known name train called the Katy Flyer, which went back even farther than that. And there was a third one whose name I can't remember right off the bat. Anyway, my grandfather was a big fan of the Texas Special. It was red and gold.
Huh.
You know, it was one of the first diesels around here.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
Mind blowing, huh?
Sure.
And
So
he-
as a kid, would you get out there on the railroad tracks and wait for it? And is that
yeah,
it was
my
the big-
grandfather
it was a
knew
big deal.
the timetable.
Yeah.
And if he wasn't busy, he'd go out every day and wave
Cool.
at it, watch it when he went by. And
That's
we
cool.
actually went somewhere when I was about in the 3rd grade. I had my uncle lived in Peoria, Illinois. And we went up there, my grandfather and grandmother went up there one Thanksgiving to visit him. And I went with him. We actually went 2 years in a row. And the first year, we caught the train in Denison. And I'm pretty sure that was the Texas Special.
Cool.
Took us to St. Louis, traded out to another train, and ended up in Peoria.
It's kind of sad now, as technology moves and culture changes, and the whole romanticism of the train life is kind of going away. I saw the other day that Amtrak is phasing out their dining cars. So the ones that are still crossing the country, the whole bucolic train thought and idea, it's kind of no more really, especially as compared to those days.
It's a sad thing nostalgically, but it's a logical thing.
Sure.
Who wants to spend, from Los Angeles to New York took 5 days.
Oh, yeah.
But what you're seeing now is a lot of the kind of recreational trains that are
narrow gauge.
Sightseeing and
That's all it really
experience.
is anymore. I've mentioned a couple of times
Nostalgia.
Tom Mack Holmes. He's a big train fan. He and my dad's nephew,
Okay.
who's still around. He's a stockbroker in Sherman. Tom Mack, when he was in his 20s, and the Texas Special was still running, I want to think it ran until 1966, but I could be wrong.
It's a pretty good run.
He would go up to Denison. He and his dad sometimes would go up to Denison and catch the Texas Special section headed south and just watch the people and go in the dining room and eat
Sure.
and go get off at Temple. And that's where they could catch the section running north.
Oh, yeah.
And then ride back to Denison. And
Is
just
that-
on a Sunday afternoon.
Is that the one I was talking about the other day with the brunch?
I think so.
I was explaining to you.
Yeah.
The
I
what?
think so.
There's a train down there that does a brunch,
Oh, no.
Oh, they may
a
have
dining
that now.
experience. I didn't know if they repurposed the lines or
No.
anything for it.
That's the one in Rusk.
Was it Rusk? I thought it was
Yeah,
Temple.
that's East Texas.
No,
Yeah.
there is no more Texas Special anywhere.
Mm.
You mentioned the dining cars. Most every railroad was known for some special meal.
Ah,
And the Katy, I think they had a little thing they called Katy Cornets, which were little small cornbread things they made.
Little hush puppies or something. Huh?
Texas Special, the TP, which ran through Bonham, Texas Eagle, the Blue Bonnet, ran from Texarkana to Fort Worth and then on west. They were known for, what was that? Cantaloupe pie.
Cantaloupe pie.
It was invented on the T&P.
I'm scared
And
of
I
that.
wrote
Yeah,
a
I
column
heard.
about that once with a recipe for it. Oh no, it's quite good.
Oh, well, I love cantaloupe, and I like pie. It stands to
made it.
reason.
I've made it and it was good.
I might have to get that recipe from you then.
Well,
I'm going to have to try that.
there's
12
a
o'clock
good-
siren cooking show.
there's a great book. It's probably still get it. Go to Amazon of just about railroad diners and railroad recipes
Oh,
and the most famous recipes on all these trains. If you rode to Wabash, which was up in Midwest, you had to eat the chicken pie. That
Okay.
was their
I had no idea about the subculture of dining
Oh,
cars.
listen.
kind of like that.
Wow.
dining cars were amazing. You had
Yeah, I can
this
imagine.
real tight space with amazing chefs who cooked things in a room that was smaller than a submarine,
Yeah,
submarine's galley,
yeah.
and just cracked it out. It was one of the glories of trains.
That's cool.
And to go back and think about the romanticism of the era too, our culture's become so casual. That was a time when people still dressed up and wore hats, and and they it was still when you were out
Yeah.
and about, you
It
know.
was a big to do.
Yeah, I say this wearing flip flops and shorts.
You wouldn't have.
No,
thrown
you wouldn't
you
have.
off.
No,
Yeah.
so
if we could, you mentioned being here at the lumberyard with your grandfather. Could you speak to maybe some friendships you might have made with local kids, or what you guys might have did playing around here?
I
Or
can a little bit. I don't remember names real well. It's been so long ago. I became good friends with the kid who was my age, boy, of the superintendent of schools in Leonard. His name was Kenneth, and I want to say it. I just don't remember his last name. This would have been back in the mid-'50s.
sure.
And he lived about 2 blocks from my grandmother's house. He lived across the street from the school on the west side. And I'd play with him a lot. There was another boy that lived down at the end of whatever that street that ran in front of her house, in front of the high school.
Yeah, I can't think of that.
Is it
the name of that.
Mulberry?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds right. Yes.
Okay. It dead ends into into that other street,
Connet.
Yeah.
Yep.
and there's a big brick house there.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who lived there, that was a boy named David Bramlett. And he was my age, and I would play with him a lot. He had a sister who I never knew, I don't think, who died at a very early age, so he's a teenager of some disease, and who had a huge collection of records.
Cool.
Really? Yeah.
And that's really all I remember about that. I probably knew more kids than that because my grandparents went to the First Methodist Church,
Uh-huh.
and I would go with them, of course.
I also attend the First Methodist Church, except for today. Sorry, Pastor Joe. So,
Well, in those days, it looks just like it does now,
Oh,
at least
yeah.
on the outside.
Yeah.
And my grandfather sang in the choir. My grandmother played the piano for the choir, and I sat in the choir and sang along too.
oh,
And in the summertime, I was probably the king of Vacation Bible School. I went to Vacation Bible School everywhere it opened up in any town. I decided it was just, I've written about that, just for my mother to get rid of me for the
Sure.
2 hours, I guess. But I'd go to some Vacation Bible School in Trenton, the Baptist and the Methodist, we didn't worry about that. I'd come over here and do the same thing. I'd go to the Vacation Bible School in Bonham. About that time of the year, you'd just gotten where you were fed up with those sorry mama's cookies and hot Kool-Aid. But
Kool-Aid. Yeah.
otherwise, it was a lot of fun.
Kool-Aid in a paper cup.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hot Kool-Aid never was real cold.
Yeah.
So I knew the kids then. There was a girl that I played with sometimes who was a couple of older than I am, who was the daughter of Dr. Van Scoik, who was a doctor in Sherman, in Leonard.
Yes.
I think her name was Jean Kay, but I don't remember much about her because, like I said, she was probably older than me enough that she didn't want to mess around with me. And probably some other kids, but those are the ones I remember.
What do you remember of some of the adults while you were a kid? Some of the adults here. I think in your article you mentioned like Yachty Albright.
Well,
Yeah.
I remember him because he ran that store over here on the square that had everything in the world, and if you didn't need it, he didn't have it. It was what we'd call now, or probably a remainder store.
Junk.
would-
A lot of junk is what I heard.
Oh, well, that's what I mean. You know,
Yeah.
being polite. Yachty
He was being circumspect.
I think they thought Yachty was kind of,
Yeah.
but he was the mayor for a few years. But I'd stop up there, and I
about
can
right.
remember getting model airplanes up there, and these great ones. Christmas, we got these great toy rifles that were made out of wood and were exact replicas of Springfield 03s.
Oh, the
wow.
World
And
War
they
One.
Yeah, except they were not nearly so heavy. They
Sure.
didn't do anything. They had to go click, click. There was no hole in the barrel.
Sure.
They were for bands and people who had color guards.
Ah, okay.
Because they looked just like a rifle from a distance, but they were a lot easier to handle.
Sure.
Well, I knew Mr. Murphy down here. It ran the filling station. The Chevrolet house, just north of
the
him.
Murphy Chevrolet.
Yeah, Murphy Chevrolet. Just north of him on the corner, I believe, was a appliance store. I don't remember who. There was a barber shop somewhere in there with a barber named Charlie. And that's where I got my haircuts. He gave me the first haircut I ever had.
You reckon that's the same location as a barber now?
I don't know.
I'm not sure about that.
I just don't know. I can't remember that close. Then there was Cousin Biff's drugstore,
Sure.
Biff Holmes.
Biff Holmes.
Oh,
And I would hang out out there, sitting in a corner reading comic books and getting free Cokes.
Cool.
And at some point, he closed that store and left and been out of business. I don't know what he did. I don't remember. And then the drugstore was up on the north side of the square, and it was called Golden's, I believe.
Yep.
And
That's-
I did the same thing up there. I'd go up there and read comic books. I don't think they gave me free drinks. Didn't have
I bet they give you one now though. They still got a fountain over
They
there.
might. Really?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'd probably
they're
have
closed
some
today.
money from my grandfather to do that. And then the stores between then and there were, I don't remember all of them. There was I don't remember anything ever being in that bank building that says Trenton State Bank.
Yeah.
One of those stores, and I believe it's the one that's kind of got an in thing glass, there was a dry goods store, and my grandmother would go into that. And at the end of that block on the corner was First National Bank. And the cashier of the bank was Felix Price. And one of my great thrills at the time was I'd be down there at the lumberyard, and my grandfather would put together the daily receipts from the day before, the checks and the cash and whatever else, and he would entrust me to take that to the bank. And he would wrap it up in the bank book and stick it down the front of my pants and cover it up with my shirt and say, now you go straight to the bank. You do not go anywhere else. You do not talk to anybody. There'd be $200 or $300 in there. Do not talk to anybody else. And boy, I was well advised. I knew what my duty was.
Right.
And off I would go. Well, what I didn't know was that as soon as I left, my grandfather stepped out onto the sidewalk where he could see all the way up there, and he'd call Mr. Price. He would step out of the bank. So I was under guard.
Right, yeah.
You
my
thought you were
whole
by
way up
yourself.
there. And I would deliver the money to the bank and get the receipt and probably get some money for it, and then maybe stop for a drink.
My dad sold a truck one time, and I was 8 or 10 years old riding a bike around town. And I saw the guy he sold the truck to, and the guy gave me $700 to take back to my dad. I'd never been so nervous in my life.
Oh, boy.
You know? ride across town, you know.
Now, was the theater up and running at these times?
Yes. And I remember going to the theater. Now, the stores I remember on that north side of the square was the drugstore and the theater. I don't remember what was in between them. There was another barber shop up there run by a guy named Guy somebody. I don't remember his last name. I don't remember. And then at the end of that block, I believe, was a washateria. Now it didn't have they didn't have fully electric washers in those days, or at least in Leonard they did other places. But the washing machine had power to wash the clothes, but when you were finished, there was no wringer function, so you had to run them through this wringer. And I think my grandmother went down there and did her clothes occasionally because she didn't have a washing machine, and my job was to turn the wringer.
Cool.
You mentioned the theater.
Yeah.
Yes, it was operating.
Can you remember a movie you might have seen?
Absolutely.
What?
I don't know. For some reason, I went to a bunch of rock and roll movies up there.
Cool.
There were, when rock and roll started coming in, and I was 10 or 11 at the time.
And this is like Buddy Holly and Richie Valens? Or
This is not even Buddy Holly and Richie Valens yet.
Oh, man.
This is Arthur Freed. No, have you ever heard of him? Alan Freed?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
The man who invented rock and roll.
Yep.
That's when Alan Freed was starting this. And he made 4 or 5 movies that were really nothing more than concerts.
Sure.
They would have these amazing bad plots with amazingly bad actors. You remember an actress named Tuesday Weld at all?
No.
The first movie, she became a big star. First movie she ever made, she was 12 years old, was in an Alan Freed movie. And they would have a little plot, but then they would go to cuts of the people singing. Laverne Baker, Bo Diddley, Chuck
Berry.
Chuck Berry.
Chuck Berry, Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Just a bunch of other ones. He seemed to be pushing the career of a singer named Frankie something, who nobody ever heard of after that. And I can remember seeing those movies up there. And I want to say I saw, there was a big movie that won Academy Award in the early 50s about the circus.
Cool.
I think I saw, well, the whole family saw that at that theater.
Cool.
And for long years, I had dreams about it.
Wow.
It was farther down the street, and they had reopened to showing old movies, and I would go up there and see what was playing.
Now, how did your parents and grandparents feel about you going and watching these rock and roll movies?
I don't think they cared. I was old enough then.
To
that I
some,
could make the
though,
choice.
that whole rock and roll movement was pretty controversial,
My
too.
parents didn't care about that. That
Pretty
wasn't something
progressive.
bothered them. Oh, you're right, though. That was true.
Yeah.
But listen, in Bonham, when I grew up, there were 3 downtown theaters. And when I'm in the first grade,
3. Wow.
I would get out of school on a nice day, walk down to my father's law office, which was downtown, by myself. I'm
course.
7, you know. Run up. His office was right over what Hunt's department store, and right next to Hunt's was the Best Theater. And between the two was a staircase that went up to the law offices. I would run up to the law offices, get some money, a quarter probably, and go back down and go to the movies. The Best was only open on Fridays and Saturdays and showed nothing but cowboy movies and serials and cartoons and,
Sure.
you know. And I would go and watch the cowboy movie. Didn't matter whether you got in the middle, they were all alike. I didn't care. And stay there until about 5 o'clock and then go up and my mother would come take us home. And
That's not a bad time.
oh, God, it was a wonderful time. I've calculated, like I said, there were 2 other movies, three sit-down movies downtown, and in the mid-50s, the drive-in,
Oh, yeah.
which only operated in the summertime. I've calculated, because I'm a big old movie fan. So was Don Eldridge, and we spent about an hour a day for 9 years talking movies.
Wow.
He has something like 3,000 movies on disc.
Oh, wow.
And we just became friends on Facebook, and I noticed you're in some sort of movie club.
Oh,
You guys have a meetup or something like that? Is that
what?
you have a meetup, like a movie
Yes, we
viewing
do.
club or
As a matter
something
of
like
fact,
that?
we have a movie group called the Movie Outfit that meets about once a month and watches movies.
Cool.
It's some cool people.
Yeah.
Now, are these older movies as well, or everything?
We watch I push for older movies, and he does too. But we
Sure.
watch for some of everything. Under my consideration, anything made after about 1961 is a new movie.
Yeah.
Right. Sure.
That's the way I look at it.
Sure. Yeah.
But I calculated once in a town like Bonham, you could have gone to the movies 365 days in a year and never seen the same film twice.
Wow.
It was in the 3 movies, even with the Best only being open 2 days a week.
Wow.
Wow.
That's
And
interesting.
Sherman had 4 sit-down theaters, and so you could have done the same thing there.
That's crazy.
It was the glory age of,
Yeah.
well, maybe not the movies because they started sliding in the mid-'60s,
Yeah.
but certainly in terms of what was available.
Yeah.
Could you name a couple of your favorite films?
Oh, depends on what I'm feeling like at the time. Some movies I'll watch every time they come on. Casablanca
Oh, yeah.
can't be built.
Sure.
I like movies of the Maltese Falcon, and I watched the other night.
Sure.
I watched a great movie last night. There's a service they offer on Turner. You can download a app to your computer, and after they show a movie live, it goes on this website called Watch Live or something for about 3 weeks. And if you have access to a cable, so that you're paying for it, which my brother does, I live with him, you can watch these movies there. So I pull that up every day and see what's up there, and I've watched one of those almost every night. I watched a movie last night called Union Depot,
Union Depot.
1932, with Douglas Fairbanks and Joan Blondell,
Oh, wow.
which is a fantastic movie nobody's ever heard of. It's
Want to mark that?
Yeah, I was about to
and
say,
that's the
mark-
kind of stuff I
mark it.
really like. And I like B movies. Eldridge and I were compatible because what he liked was went out a little longer than what I did, and so he introduced me to a lot of things I would have missed. I introduced him to the B's. I'm a big fan of B movies,
Oh.
and I think that B movies are maybe the best example of what was so incredibly good about the American film industry.
Yeah.
And, people talk about French technique and the German style, and they tended to poo-paw American. They don't have any style. Sure they did. The American style was so good, you couldn't notice it.
Wow. Yeah.
And even in the B's, that was usually the case. Their lighting is perfect. Their composition's perfect. Their editing's perfect. I mean, it was just faultless.
Wow.
I like that. We might have to save that for another episode.
Yeah, we're gonna
That
have
would
to
be
delve
fun.
into that. I'm definitely not familiar with a lot of B movies prior to 1961.
We'll get me and Eldridge on here, and we'll talk movies till you're blind
That-
in the face.
Do you,
Hey, we'll
do you
do
remember
that.
anything about the Leonard picnic? And I think you mentioned the fish fry, the fireman's fish fry.
I am sure that I went to the picnic,
Yeah.
but frankly, I don't have a specific memory of that.
Yeah.
I think because probably by the time it had become more of a carnival.
Yeah.
Right.
Was it still out here at the city park on Highway 69? I don't
That's
even
the
know.
city pond.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, by the
That-
pond.
That's
Yep.
where that was
Leonard
for the
Lake,
wedding.
from
Yeah,
what I understand.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where they had all those events.
Yeah.
And I do have you have to remember that sometimes these memories are almost pictures in your head rather than
sure.
Sure.
things you can think of directly.
Yeah.
But I remember going to the volunteer fireman's fish fry out there one year with my grandfather and my grandmother. And what impressed me was these great big wash tubs full of fried fish and wash tubs full of iced down soda pop. And all you had to do was go up and say, I want one of those and one of those.
Wow, yeah.
You didn't have to pay. I didn't have to pay for it.
Yeah.
And I just remember that being great.
Sure. Yeah, that's a magical
my
thing for a kid.
grandfather was a volunteer fireman for a long time. And right after I moved back to Sherman, somebody sent me a newspaper clipping. That the actual, what they got of the Leonard graphic, and actually what they clipped was a story about my parents and our family moving back to Bonham. But you flipped it over on the other side, and there was a story about my grandfather. He had retired as volunteer fireman after 20 years. This would have been in the early 1950s. No. Yeah, the early 1950, I guess. And the fireman had thrown a chili supper for him. And I guess, I don't remember where it was. I don't remember that. What I found interesting was he made the chili.
Wait
At
a minute.
his own party?
He had to cook his own party. And I
This
guess
is the question: with or without beans?
without beans,
Okay.
of course.
All
What
right.
are you, crazy? In fact, I still use his chili recipe. He
That's
must
cool.
have been the best chili maker.
Yeah, they said,
Yeah, I
hey,
guess
listen,
so.
we appreciate all you've done for the department, but you're going to have to cook your last meal here.
That's the way it was. What else I remember about that? Of course, down on the square was where the firehouse was
Mm-hmm.
and the post office. And another one of my duties that I took great seriousness was when, I guess we would go home in the evening if I'd been down a lumberyard someplace. We'd stop and he'd let me go in and get the mail. And it's one of those things that just lodged in my brain. The post office box was 267, and it had two little dials that you had to unlock it, and it was G1T1. And I would get the mail.
Never forget, right?
No,
That's
I'm
cool.
ready. The post office comes back like that.
That's cool. Couple other things. Ice house. What? We don't know about an ice house. Can you describe what you remember the
Oh,
ice
God, yeah,
house?
I
Because
know
I mean
about
that's a
that.
foreign.
Now, that was just back here, right?
It's a
Just
foreign
behind us?
idea. I
Yeah,
think it's across the
somewhere-
railroad tracks and to the left, right back here.
I couldn't tell you exactly where it was, but that sounds about right. We would come to the ice house in the summertime when my brothers or my parents were coming over to Leonard to eat lunch. In the summer, we'd make ice cream for them. My grandmother would cook it up the night before. You'd make a custard base,
Yeah.
cooked and then sat in the refrigerator. And my grandfather would skip, and I would skip church that Sunday. And we would get in the car and go down to the ice house and get at the big wash tub. And they had a big machine, and they would bring out a block of ice and drop it in the machine that would shoot out this ice. And we'd take that back home to make ice cream. And he had a wooden ice cream freezer with a crank
Cool.
that you kept full of water all the time, so it would swell up and it'd stay tight. And in would go the ice, and in would go the mixture into the what do you call that big iron, the metal thing?
Crank bucket.
The
Well, it
canister.
had a name for it.
Okay.
The canister was probably what it was.
There you go.
In would go the dasher, and they'd hook it up, and I would turn the crank until I couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And I guess the older I got, the more I could go, but it still got stiffer as the ice cream got stiffer.
Yeah.
And eventually I'd turn the deal over to him. We'd do it out on the back porch. And then it would be taken out. I'd get the dasher for my work, but you took it in the kitchen and ate it licked it off over
Yeah.
one of the great treats of all time.
Absolutely.
And then it went in containers and went in a refrigerator so it'd firm up before you ate it.
We are my family are big proponents of homemade ice cream made in that fashion, However, there's something that we do. I was going to say wrong. I don't know if it's wrong. We do different, but ours never really firms up. It's mostly firm, but it's kind of soupy. And now I can't eat ice cream any other way.
Really?
I've been doing it my whole life, and
I never know. I make ice cream at home sometimes, but I let it firm up. But I kind of like it soft too.
yeah, I love it. Love it.
Another thing that they had, their house over there. My grandmother lived there until she was in her 80s. And finally, she just got too old and moved to a nursing home. And they sold the house to the people behind her who has that funeral home there. And they bought the property and knocked a hole in the back of the house and used it as a garage, which irritated me big time because that's our house. You don't do that to our house. But they did. And then I came back one year from Atlanta, and it was gone. There was nothing on that lot anymore. But the house still exists. The fellow who run the florist shop over here bought it.
Is that Eddie Sudduth?
Yeah.
Who?
Eddie Sudduth by chance?
Of course, Eddie.
Yeah.
I don't know why I can't remember his name. And he moved it. It's sitting over here on the west side of about 2 blocks over. He's never restored it. He was always going to do that, but he hadn't. It's sitting over there on blocks. Anyway, you went out the back door, and it was a real short little porch. And right next to it was a little small building that we always called the smokehouse. And I suspect at one time it may have been. But it had windows in it and a roof. My grandmother in the 50s, they just used it for storage. And it was full of old National Geographics, which I used to go read, and whatever else they needed to store. Back in the early 50s, the ladies of Leonard had decided to go on an art binge. Some woman here taught art classes. And I think they took some art lessons and painted ceramics. My grandmother was involved in that, and that became her studio.
Cool.
For a while. By the time I knew it when I was doing that. But then it was just a store place.
Cool.
And next to that was a concrete storm cellar. In fact, at one time when my mother was a little girl, they were hit by a tornado that took the roof off of that house.
Oh man.
Here in Leonard.
And going in the storm cellar was dark and damp and full of cobwebs. Which my grandmother kept canned goods down there. She had put
It was
up.
like a root cellar.
Yeah, like a root cellar.
Cool.
And back behind that, they had a big garden. And behind the garden, right on that little alley that runs back there, was a chicken house. A great big, like 3-room chicken house. And my grandfather kept chickens.
Cool.
When I was a little kid, including a rooster that followed him around everywhere named Whitey. And I would be over there sometimes on the weekends when my parents were coming, going to have fried chicken. And he was going to get some chickens on Saturday
Sure.
for the Sunday dinner, and he'd go out there, and I'd go out to watch. And he'd had a little long wire thing with a hook, and he had hooked 2 of those chickens with a leg and then wring their heads off. And I didn't like that. There was a little peach tree in the backyard, and I'd climb up in the peach tree because the headless chickens would flap around for a while. I don't got to have anything to do with that. No, that's just, I'm sorry, that's too scary.
I remember my great-grandmother, they lived here in Leonard. Ruby Fuller was her name, and she would do the same, and it was traumatizing to me as a kid.
Oh.
And it seemed that they ate fried chicken just about every day.
Well, that may be true. We were on the square up here. There was I don't remember what's on the other side of the square. There was a meat market down there at some point, but I don't know. Maybe that white building. And I don't remember much on I think there may have been a grocery store on the east side. And over on this side, I don't remember much except the Blue Moon Cafe, which building's still there. And I think the Leonard Graphic was over on this side at the time.
Two quick hits here. Otis at the dump.
Does that?
Say again?
Otis at the dump.
Otis at the dump.
You're
At
smirking.
the end of the alley, now, Leonard was, like all southern towns, segregated. I don't know if they even had a black school in Leonard. I don't know where the black folks lived exactly. But at the end of the alley, behind my grandfather's house, at the end that would have run into whatever that street is, Main Street, I guess, there was a little bitty house with only like 2 rooms where a guy named Otis and his wife lived. He was African American,
Okay.
to be politically correct. He was kind of little and wiry, and she was huge. And I would go down and visit Otis because I thought he was much more interesting than a lot of these other people. And I remember once Otis taking me to the dump. I don't know how old I was. And I just thought, boy, that's the greatest place I've ever seen. And I rummaged around in the dump, and I found a big box full of these. They looked sort of like popcorn boxes. You had to fold them together. They were probably for some kind of something like that. And I took those back with me and folded them all up and used them for like bricks or something.
Cool.
I don't remember much about that. But I was just entranced with Otis. He was one of my buddies.
Cool. The Calaboose, the jail back here.
The Calaboose is still there.
Probably played around in there as a kid, huh?
Well, I never played. I never saw it open.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
it's been
would,
locked up for a while.
Go over there sometimes and stand on something and peer in the window to see if I could see a prisoner. I never did because I don't imagine they'd used it in years. Leonard's law enforcement in those days was a man known widely as the Green Hornet. He was the constable. And he was death on bootleggers. Bootleggers all over Fannin County.
Now that's some stuff I'd like to get into.
Did you tell me this on the phone
What?
when we spoke the other day? Did you tell me about the Green Hornet?
A little bit.
Somebody did recently. I can't
Well,
remember.
the Green
if it was
Hornet was a famous radio show.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about the police officer around here.
Well,
Constable.
I don't remember much
yeah.
about it. People would just talk about it. He was called that because he had a green car.
Okay.
And you said he was just hell on bootleggers, huh?
Well, that's what I heard. He'd like to go catch bootleggers.
See,
And I guess if you got anything else, you'd call him because he didn't have a deputy sheriff over here.
Now that's some.
And a few years ago, I was having lunch at a fast food place in Sherman, and the man next in the booth across from me said, "Excuse me, and are you so and so?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I know who you are." He recognized me from the paper, and he said, "You probably don't know me because I was a couple of years older than you were." But he said, "I grew up in Leonard. My dad was the Green Hornet."
Oh wow!
And we spent about an hour there talking about it.
Wow. And what was his name?
I don't remember.
Okay.
And I don't remember. I don't guess I ever knew the name of the Green Hornet.
We got some research to do.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that Leonard in the 30s was a rough place,
Really?
and the 20s somewhere in there. It was a pretty wild and open town.
Well, we did hear something about
We heard the south side of the square was somewhere the ladies might not have traveled to.
Yeah.
At a time and place.
And there
May
was
have
a
been.
underground fight club.
Yeah, we heard about a fight
point.
club with a.
He may have been the one that told me that. Of course, I came along much later, so I
Yeah.
didn't know about that.
Well, we've got some research to do. Like I said, we're just starting this podcast. So we're kind of trying to get some of these stories out and hear some cool, interesting things that we might not know about.
I just thinking of things.
Yeah.
I keep thinking of things. One of the great treats in the summertime, where the water tower was over behind the old high school.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I guess it would just get too full. And the water there was a drain up there somewhere up right near where the top of it was, and the water would start cascading out of that.
Cool.
Oh,
And
man.
the word immediately passed around to every kid in Leonard who would run up there and stand under the water because it was just ice cold.
Cool.
And I had to head for the water tower. to
Oh,
do
wow.
that.
I was hoping that story was going to involve a bootlegger, but I guess that's a treat for a different time.
My brothers, when they got a little older, if we were over here together, we'd go over there, and the old Leonard High School had this fire escape in the back that was a classic, just steel open
Oh,
fire
we're
escape.
familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We are familiar.
At some point, they must have had another kind because they had a slide on the schoolroom yard that was the kind that you slid down. But this one was the open kind, 3 stories high. I would climb up to the first story. I'm not big on heights. My brothers, who were younger than I was, could climb all the way to the top. They would also climb up the water tower. They would go up 2 sections. I would go up half of the first section and get back down and say, "You're crazy. You better come down." So there was also a baseball park that I have a vague memory of over somewhere east of the school. And I don't ever remember seeing a game in there. But it was the old kind of ballpark that had stands that were covered.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that's where the town team played. And I occasionally went over there with my grandfather and just thought running around the bases would be so exciting. I don't think I ever did. We'd go play ball out in the schoolyard. My brothers and I would do that.
Sure.
He'd hit flies to us. And my brothers had a game we put together with the three of us. It was double play where we'd go over to that. I think the backstop's still there. It had a baseball field where you would play like first base, second base, third base with a first baseman.
Are you talking about at the schoolyard?
Yeah.
Yes, it was there when I was a kid in the
Yeah.
80s. Mm-hmm.
They also had a school warning go slow sign that sat right there in the middle of the street from Coca-Cola. That was a iron tin cutout of a policeman with his hand up.
I wonder where that's at today.
That was on both sides, reminded you to go slow in the school zone.
And drink Coke.
And the school had something in it that I'm pretty sure this was there. I don't remember ever going into high school much. But I believe the high school had an auditorium that took 2 floors.
Wow.
There was an auditorium inside the school with a stage and all that, and then it went up to the 3rd story, and there was a balcony. Bonham had that was real common in schools in those days. Bonham had one.
Sure.
Although in the 40s, Bonham, when I got another auditorium, floored it over and turned it into classrooms. I don't know if Leonard ever did that, but I can remember being in there once for some reason and seeing that.
Wow.
Is that the one that burned down?
Yeah. You had something else there. What is this? What is this?
Chasing fungos.
Say again?
Chasing fungos?
Well, that's what that. My grandfather, I'd go over there. My brothers were here. They would when they were playing ball. And we'd just go over there and he'd just fungos or flies.
Gotcha. Okay, that's what I
okay.
thought. I didn't know if there's a translation or
he'd
something there.
hit balls for us, and
Yep.
we'd go chase flies. I mean, you're 12. You're better than Mickey Mantle. I mean, we play football over there. You know where the tennis courts are over there?
Yep.
They were there. There were tennis courts there then,
Wow.
and there was this sidewalk that came out of the school came right by them, so it made a place probably 25 yards wide or 20
It's
yards
perfect
wide.
for schoolyard football.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we'd go over there and play football. We would. I don't ever remember anybody playing tennis over there.
Still don't really.
Yeah.
Might still be the same nets over there. I don't know.
Like I said, I was born and raised here in Leonard. I was born in 81. We did a lot of these same things you're talking about when I was a kid in the 80s and early 90s.
What all you do is look at your phone.
And nowadays, it's sad that kids don't do any of those things. My dad, we would ride our bikes all over town when I was a kid, and we were enamored with the railroad tracks and the cemetery. And my dad did the same when he was a kid, and it sounds like that's the way it's always
been. There was a place, I remember going out, I think with David Bramlett, I mentioned his name, one Saturday where we spent the whole day wandering around and doing this and that. And he took me to a little creek, where the road goes this way and that way and then goes over and hits.
Yes, sir. We call it Boney Creek.
Boney Creek, I was going to say.
There's a little creek there. I don't think it's there anymore. Or
it's still there.
Anyway, there was a little culvert, but the creek was pretty good. And it was full of crawdads, crawfish.
Yeah.
And you had a string and some bacon. And
You're looking at some seasoned professionals.
Yeah.
You hauled out crawfish. I don't know what we did when we caught them. We probably didn't know.
Well, I can remember a certain time of year here in Leonard when the ditches fill up and it's warm enough outside. Every ditch in town that was worth anything would be full of kids. And we would just collect as many as we could and then go back and make them fight each other.
We would always dam up creeks, try to dam them up.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Bonham was that way.
All right.
We would go ask my grandmother for all the bacon she could give us, and we would go try our luck over town.
One of the great side trips coming into Leonard, when we came over here, we used to just come 78. But every now and then we get my father to agree to come through Randolph. And then take the Leonard Hills.
Oh, yeah, Valley Creek.
Yeah.
And that was before the highway department straightened them out.
Oh.
Yeah.
And it was like a roller coaster. That was so exciting to ride the Leonard Hills.
That's a fun stretch.
We have a few questions as we start to wrap this up. We'd like to ask you. They're kind of we like to say they're randomly drawn, but
they are randomly drawn.
I kind of dig through them.
Let's
here.
keep
somewhat random.
Theater of the mind. They are randomly drawn.
Yeah.
I may give random answers.
all right.
But yeah, we got 5 questions to wrap up the episode, and they're just kind of should be easy questions. Nothing too crazy.
Well,
we'll see what James's is first. Here we go.
We'll start it off with the last game of pool you played. Do you remember?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I wanted to bring that one out.
I spent one summer railroading in Wichita Falls for the Fort Worth and Denver.
Okay.
I lived at the YMCA, and right around the corner was a pool hall. And I remember deciding I was going to learn to play pool.
The education of a young man in
And
those
I
places.
got a book and read it. That's my theory on almost everything. And I would go down there and play pool. And I never got any good at all and gave it up. And that's probably the last time I played
There
pool.
you go.
What year was this?
Hmm?
What year was this?
1966.
Okay. Oh, okay. Good.
Wow.
That's a good, strong answer. I
I
like,
like that. Yeah, that was good.
Alrighty. Random question number 2. Could you tell me something that you thought was cool when you were young that is you don't think is cool anymore?
I think you may have said Democrats earlier.
Yeah, there we go. Because, of course, in those days, there weren't any Republicans in the
Right.
state of Texas, but there certainly were none in Fannin County.
All right. Right. It's changed now.
But I thought was cool then, and I don't think is cool now. I don't know. I'd have to really think about that more.
We'll
I
catch
don't,
that on episode 2.
to my mind, most of the stuff in the past is better than it is now, but that's wrong.
Well, I don't know. I think we kind of lean on that too.
We'll accept Democrats.
Yeah.
I don't really want to give up computers
No,
and all
they're
that
great.
stuff. So,
Yeah.
you know,
All right. So, random question number 3.
they had better chicken fried steak back then.
Oh, okay.
bet.
That's fair.
Do you collect anything?
Yes. I was, when I lived in Atlanta, a book collector.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
When I left Atlanta to come back to Texas, I had something like 5,000 books,
Wow.
Goodness.
hardbacks,
Okay.
plus another 2,000 or 3,000
That makes moving
paperbacks.
fun.
Well, I didn't move them. I finally sold them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As soon as I got back, I started buying them back. And I finally whittled it down when I moved over to live with my brother to about 3 bookshelves full.
Gotcha.
Also collected movies,
Okay.
but I've still got a lot of those.
The
Stories.
if you're not collecting like first editions or whatever, the digital age does make collecting things a little easier. If you're just doing it for the actual art of it, right? Like I'm a big book guy too, but now that you have digital format books, you can have thousands and this right here. So
That's where they are.
yep. Pretty
I've
interesting.
bought books. I've got quite a few books from Kindle on Kindle. And I
Oh.
read them on the phone.
Do you
In fact,
do
I was-
Audible?
Yes.
I love Audible.
I've got a bunch of Audible stuff. I buy books on Audible that I have hard copies of and then sell the hard copies.
There you go.
I'm listening to the first volume of the guy who did the piece on history of the Army in World War II in Europe. What's his name? He's got a new series out, first volume out on the American Revolution,
Oh wow.
and I'm listening to that.
It's not the guy that wrote
The Army at Dawn.
Stephen Pressfield. Is it Stephen Pressfield?
No,
No. Okay.
I lose names these days sometimes.
me too.
And I think of them later.
Yeah.
That's on Audible. I just downloaded. I'm a big fan of C.S. Forrester. My dad introduced me to him, and I was looking around Amazon the other day, and they had 3 or 4 C.S. Forresters on Kindle for 99 cents.
Oh wow.
And so I just finished reading Death to the French, and I've now started The Good Shepherd, all of which I've read before. But,
Sure. It's an easy, cheap way to revisit.
it is, and I've got this with me all the time, so I
Sure.
can, anytime I've got nothing to do, I can do a little reading.
Right. All right, Jason. Sorry.
Alrighty. We talked about you're a big movie buff, so this one it should come to you quickly. Name a movie you can quote from start to finish.
I can probably do Casablanca pretty close.
Sure.
There's a few other movies that, again, we know all the. I know most of the dialogue, what's going to happen.
I feel like Mr. Sutherland's movies are classier than what I can quote.
Oh yeah, he would be so disappointed with
Yeah.
my list.
No. All right, last question. What is your first memory of Leonard?
Yeah.
Now, this is one of those things that there's no
Hard to articulate?
there's no hard copy
Sure.
of that. Because I came to Leonard when I'm not quite a year old and was here for 6 months.
Sure.
I think I learned to walk around a round coffee table
Oh wow, yeah.
that was either my mother's or my grandmother's.
Little
I
snapshots
can't
in your head.
prove- Yeah, I can't prove it. It's
Sure.
a snapshot. It's a fuzzy picture.
Wow.
And that's probably my first memory of here.
Sure.
And that may be wrong.
No, that's a good answer. We
Yeah.
like that.
I like it.
Mr. Sutherland, we really appreciate you coming by. I mean,
Yes.
we can't tell you what it means to hear these stories. This is, as we talk about the digital age and move forward and the way things are changing, we want to get as many of these stories as we can, to kind of hold on to some of the culture and the history of Leonard. So we very much appreciate you coming.
Yep.
coming
Big round of applause. Thank you very much, sir.
Yep.
Yeah,
Thank
we,
you.
we appreciate
I
you.
appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
All right, fellas, that's it. We've got a wrap up coming up and another guest coming up this week.
Yep.
Stay tuned.